Do you have any idea what you just did? Grant Whitaker's voice cut through the private dining room like a blade wrapped in velvet, low enough to sound controlled, sharp enough to make every glass on the table feel suddenly fragile. 30 seconds earlier, the billionaire CEO of Whitaker Aerospace Group had lifted a crystal tumbler of rare bourbon beneath the amber lights of the Meridian Club, a members-only restaurant perched above downtown Chicago, where the windows framed the city like it belonged to whoever could afford the view. The room had been built for power. Dark walnut walls, white orchids, soft jazz, a single long table dressed in linen so clean it seemed untouched by ordinary life. Around it sat investors, attorneys, board advisors, and men who measured other men by the silence that followed their names. Tonight was supposed to end with a $900 million signature and a toast that would make headlines by morning. Then Maya Brooks stepped forward. She did not shout. She did not explain. She did not ask permission. The 26-year-old black waitress moved with a silver tray balanced in one hand, her black apron tied neatly at her waist, her expression calm in a way that made the room even more nervous. Just as Grant brought the glass within inches of his mouth, Maya reached in, removed it from his hand, and placed a different glass before him with the quiet precision of someone replacing a candle before the flame could touch the curtains. The entire table froze. A fork stopped halfway to a plate of dry-aged steak. Someone's watch chimed softly, and no one moved to silence it. Preston Vale, Grant's business partner for the evening and the man seated closest to him, leaned back with a slow smile spreading across his face. "Well," he said, letting the word drip with amusement, "that is certainly a new kind of service." A few people laughed because powerful men had laughed first, and in rooms like that, laughter often followed money before it followed truth. Diane Mercer, the restaurant manager, appeared near the doorway as if panic had pulled her out of the wall. Her eyes went straight to the glass in Maya's hand, then to Grant's face, then to the investors. She knew what everyone knew. Staff did not interrupt a billionaire at the moment of a toast. Staff did not touch a guest's drink without being asked. Staff did not turn a private signing dinner into a question mark. But Maya stood still, the original glass resting on her tray beneath a folded white napkin, her shoulders straight, her breathing even. Grant stared at her as if she had stepped across a border he had spent his entire life teaching people to respect. He was 42, polished, white, powerful, the kind of man whose name appeared in business magazines beside words like visionary and relentless. He did not like surprises. He especially did not like surprises delivered by someone wearing a name tag. "Answer me," he said. "Do you understand what you just interrupted?" Maya looked at the glass, then at him. Her voice was soft, but it carried. "Yes, sir." Preston gave another quiet laugh. "Then perhaps you can explain why just the waitress decided to manage the table." The words landed exactly the way he intended. Just the waitress. A title turned into a cage. Maya did not flinch. She had heard smaller versions of that sentence all her life, in grocery lines, hospital waiting rooms, college offices, and restaurants where people looked at her hands before they looked at her face. But tonight was not about pride. Tonight was about the 5 seconds she had just spent deciding whether losing her job was worse than staying silent. Vivian Cross, Grant's communications director, rose halfway from her chair and whispered, "No one record this." That was when the room became truly quiet. Not because Maya had done something rude, because everyone sensed there was more beneath it, something hidden under the polished surface of the evening. Grant's eyes narrowed. "Put the glass back." Maya's fingers tightened around the tray once, then released. "I cannot do that, sir." Diane inhaled sharply near the door. Preston's smile disappeared for the first time. Grant leaned forward, his cuff links flashing in the candlelight. "You cannot." Maya met his gaze, steady and respectful, but no longer invisible. "Not until security checks it." The sentence did not explode. It spread. Across the table. Into the corners. Through the chandeliers. Grant looked down at the untouched glass beneath the white napkin, then back at the waitress everyone had dismissed, and for the first time that night, the most powerful man in the room was not angry because he had been embarrassed. He was angry because a part of him had begun to wonder if she was right. Diane Mercer moved first, because managers in rooms like the Meridian Club are trained to fear silence more than noise. She crossed the carpet quickly, her black heels barely making a sound, her professional smile trembling at the edges. "Mr. Whitaker, I am so sorry," she said, though her eyes stayed on Maya as if an apology could also be a warning. "This is not our standard of service. Maya, step outside with me now." Maya did not move. The tray remained level in her hands. The original glass sat beneath the folded white napkin like a secret the room wanted buried. Grant's jaw tightened. He had been interrupted, corrected, and quietly challenged in front of investors who had flown in from New York, Dallas, and Los Angeles to watch him close the largest private aerospace deal of the year. Men like Grant did not build empires by letting uncertainty sit at their tables. They removed it. They replaced it. They made it sign non-disclosure agreements. But this uncertainty had a face, and her face was calm. Preston Vale leaned toward Grant with a low chuckle that tried too hard to sound relaxed. "Grant, come on. This is theater." She probably mixed up the glasses and panicked. Then he turned to Maya, his smile thin and polished. "No offense, but this is why private rooms require experienced staff." No offense. The phrase people use right before they place disrespect on the table and pretend it is a napkin. Maya felt every eye on her uniform, her apron, her name tag, her dark hands holding the tray. In that moment, she knew exactly what they saw. Not the woman who had noticed 3 small details no one else caught. Not the daughter who had spent years reading prescription labels for her mother, monitoring symptoms, and learning the difference between ordinary discomfort and something wrong. Not the student who had once carried anatomy flashcards on the bus to community college before medical bills swallowed her tuition. They saw a waitress who had forgotten her place. Vivian Cross lifted her phone, not to record, but to control. "Everyone, please keep your devices down," she said with the crisp authority of someone who made scandals disappear for a living. "This is a private business dinner." Grant did not look at her. He looked at Maya. "Why?" he asked. One word. It sounded like a command, but beneath it was the first crack of doubt. Maya took a breath. She could not accuse Preston. Not yet. She could not describe what she did not fully understand. She only had what she had seen. Preston's hand near the glass for too long, the cocktail napkin resting over the rim for half a second, the way he kept urging Grant to toast before reading the final appendix, and the strange stillness in his face when she switched the drink. "Because something was wrong," Maya said. Preston laughed again, louder this time. "Something was wrong? That is your explanation?" Diane stepped closer, her voice tight. "Maya, you need to leave this room immediately." Maya finally looked at her manager. There was no rebellion in her eyes, only a tired kind of courage. "I will leave after security takes the glass." The air shifted. Grant's fingers rested on the table, inches from the replacement drink, but he did not touch it. Preston's smile faded completely now. "This is absurd," he said. "Are we really going to let a server derail a $900 million agreement because she had a feeling?" Maya turned the tray slightly, keeping the covered glass away from every hand at the table. "Not a feeling," she said softly. "A pattern." That word landed differently. Pattern. It sounded less like panic and more like observation. Grant heard it. So did Vivian. So did Diane, though she wished she had not. For the first time, the room was not watching Maya as a problem. It was watching the glass. Pattern was the word Maya Brooks had trusted long before any powerful man trusted her. It was the word her mother used when Maya was 15 and learning how to stretch one paycheck across groceries, bus fare, and a pharmacy bill that always seemed to arrive with teeth. "Pay attention to patterns, baby," her mother would say from the kitchen table in their small apartment on the south side, sorting pill bottles beside a chipped blue mug. "People tell the truth before they mean to. Rooms do too." Maya had carried that sentence into adulthood like a key. She carried it through early mornings on the Red Line, through double shifts, through community college night classes where she once studied basic nursing with a backpack full of flashcards and a heart full of plans. She had wanted scrubs, not an apron. She had wanted clinical rotations, not private dining rooms. She had wanted to learn how to help people before their pain became an emergency. But life has a way of changing uniforms without asking permission. When her mother's health declined, Maya left school after the second semester, telling herself it was only temporary. Temporary became 1 year. 1 year became 3. The textbooks went into a plastic storage bin under her bed, right beside a pair of white nursing shoes she had bought on sale and never worn outside. Still, the training stayed in her. So did the instinct. She noticed color changes. Hand tremors, Forced smiles. Guests who drank too quickly because they were nervous. Men who spoke loudly when they were hiding something. Women who went silent when no one was listening. At the Meridian Club, that skill made her valuable, though no one put it on her paycheck. She knew which regulars preferred sparkling water at room temperature, which board members avoided shellfish, which politicians liked corner seats, and which executives smiled with their mouths while negotiating with their eyes. That evening had started like any other VIP service. Maya arrived at 4:30 in the afternoon, tied her black apron, polished 24 water glasses, checked the private dining setup twice, and read the printed guest notes clipped to the service station. Grant Whitaker. Aerospace. Confidential signing dinner. Premium bourbon. No press. Highest discretion. She had seen those words before in different arrangements. They all meant the same thing. Be invisible, but perfect. Preston Vale arrived first, wearing a charcoal suit and a friendly expression that felt too smooth. He asked where Grant would sit. Then he asked who would serve the first pour. Then he joked that timing mattered because billionaires were most agreeable during a toast. Maya smiled politely, but her mind marked it. First pattern. At 6:57, Grant entered with Vivian Cross and 2 attorneys. The room adjusted itself around him. Conversations straightened. Shoulders squared. Even Diane Mercer stood taller. Grant did not act loud. He did not need to. Power made noise for him. Preston greeted him warmly, too warmly, placing one hand near the back of Grant's chair, guiding him to the exact seat Maya had already seen him study. Second pattern. Dinner moved cleanly for the first hour. Contracts opened. Glasses filled. Steaks arrived. Jazz murmured from hidden speakers. Then, just before the toast, Preston reached for a cocktail napkin from inside his jacket instead of using the folded linen already beside his plate. He laughed at something Grant said, leaned forward, and for less than a second, the napkin passed over the rim of Grant's glass. The motion was small, elegant, almost nothing, but Maya saw it. Third pattern. The corner camera, she noticed, had no clean view. A tall white orchid arrangement blocked the angle. Fourth pattern. Then Preston said, "Before we review the appendix, let us drink to trust." Fifth pattern. Trust. The word sounded wrong in his mouth. Maya felt the old lesson rise in her chest. Rooms tell the truth too. Back in the private dining room, with every eye now fixed on the covered glass, she stood behind that truth alone. The room waited for Maya to become smaller. That was what rooms like that did when someone without power spoke too clearly. They waited for fear to pull her shoulders down, for embarrassment to soften her voice, for the old invisible rules to return and place her back where they believed she belonged. But Maya Brooks did not shrink. She stood beside the long dining table with the silver tray held steady, the covered glass untouched, and the folded white napkin resting over it like a warning no one wanted to read. Grant Whitaker studied her face. He was used to reading hesitation in people, the tiny flicker before a lie, the nervous smile before a bad number, the desperate confidence before a weak proposal. Maya had none of that. She looked worried, yes. Any reasonable person would be worried while standing in front of a billionaire, a furious manager, and a table full of people who could make one phone call and end her job before dessert. But she did not look confused. That was what bothered him. Preston Vale pushed his chair back with a smooth scrape against the carpet. "Grant, this has gone far enough," he said, his voice polished for the room. "We are turning a business dinner into a circus because a server misunderstood what she saw." Maya felt the word server land, then slide off. Diane Mercer stepped closer, her face pale beneath the warm lights. "Maya, please," she said quietly, and for the first time her voice was not angry. It was frightened. "Give me the glass and step into the hallway." Maya did not hand it over. "I will give it to security," she said. "Only security." Vivian Cross looked from Maya to Grant, calculating headlines that did not exist yet. "That may be the cleanest option," she said carefully. Preston turned toward her, the charm in his face thinning. "Vivian, do not encourage this. We have a signing to complete." Grant heard that sentence differently now. "We have a signing to complete." Not, "Are you all right?" Not, "Let us confirm there is no risk." Not even, "What exactly did she see?" Preston's attention had gone straight to the contract, straight to momentum, straight to getting Grant past the glass and into the agreement. Another pattern formed in the silence. Grant slowly lowered his hand from the table. "Call security," he said. Diane blinked. "Sir." Call security. And no one touches that glass. Preston stared at him, then laughed once, too short to be real. You cannot be serious. Grant turned his head. I am serious enough to wait 10 minutes. Those 10 minutes stretched across the room like a bridge no one wanted to cross. Diane spoke quickly into her headset. Vivian asked the attorneys to close their folders. A younger investor near the far end of the table looked down at his plate as if distance could excuse him from choosing a side. Maya remained still, but inside, her pulse moved fast. She thought of her mother at the kitchen table, counting pills, reminding her that doing the right thing did not always feel noble. Sometimes it felt like standing alone while everyone decided whether your courage was inconvenient. Preston began pacing near his chair, careful not to seem nervous, failing because carefulness itself had become suspicious. This is ridiculous, he said. If we are going to inspect every drink in Chicago because someone had a hunch, we might as well cancel the whole evening. Maya looked at him then. Not long, not dramatic, just enough. I did not say every drink, she said. I said his. The words landed with surgical calm. Grant's eyes moved from Maya to Preston. Diane went silent. Vivian stopped typing on her phone. Even the hidden jazz seemed to thin out beneath the pressure. Preston's expression changed for less than a second, so quickly most people would have missed it. Irritation slipped into something sharper, then vanished behind a smile. But Maya saw it. Grant saw that she saw it. A knock came at the private room door. Officer Daniel Hayes from hotel security stepped in with 2 staff members, professional, quiet, and alert. The sight of him shifted the balance immediately. This was no longer a service issue. It was a question of truth. Maya placed the tray carefully on a side table and stepped back with both hands visible, not because she had done anything wrong, but because she understood how easily people like her were blamed when powerful rooms became afraid. That is the glass, she said. And the napkin should be checked too. Preston's head turned. Too fast. Grant noticed. The billionaire who had once been angry at Maya for interrupting him now looked at the covered glass, then at the man urging him not to wait, and the anger inside him found a new direction. Officer Daniel Hayes did not rush the moment. That was what made the room colder. He moved with the calm patience of someone who knew that truth did not need drama to become heavy. He asked Diane to clear the side table. He asked Vivian to keep everyone seated. He asked Maya to describe exactly what she had seen, not what she believed, not what she feared, only what her eyes had caught. Maya nodded once and spoke with the kind of precision no one had expected from the woman they had tried to dismiss 5 minutes earlier. Mr. Vale arrived before the other guests. He asked where Mr. Whitaker would sit. He asked who would pour the first drink. Just before the toast, he used a cocktail napkin from his jacket instead of the linen on the table. The napkin touched the rim of Mr. Whitaker's glass. Then he encouraged the toast before the appendix review. No one interrupted. Not even Preston. The words were too clean, too ordered, too difficult to laugh away. Grant watched Maya as she spoke and felt each detail settle into place, one after another, like lights turning on in a dark hallway. He remembered Preston's easy hand on the chair, the little joke about timing, the pressure to drink before reading the final pages. At the time, it had all seemed like charm. Now charm looked like camouflage. Preston exhaled through his nose, smiling again, but the smile had lost its warmth. This is embarrassing, he said. She is building a story out of restaurant movements. I touched a napkin. I made a toast. That is not a crime. Officer Hayes did not react. Then you will not mind waiting while we review the hallway camera. The hallway? Preston asked too quickly. Grant's eyes narrowed. Maya's gaze dropped for half a second, not in fear, but recognition. She had been right to mention the napkin. The dining room camera was partly blocked by the white orchids, but the hallway outside the private room had a clean angle of the entrance. It would not show the glass. It might show what Preston brought in. Officer Hayes spoke into his radio and requested the footage from 6:30 to 7:10. Those minutes became a trial without a judge. The attorneys whispered, then stopped. Vivian stood near the wall with her phone lowered, her crisis instincts slowly giving way to concern. Diane looked as if she wanted to apologize to Maya, but did not yet know whether the room would permit it. Maya did not look at her. She kept her eyes on the covered glass and the napkin, because dignity did not mean relaxing before danger had passed. Grant finally turned to Preston. Why were you pushing the toast before the appendix? Preston gave a soft laugh. Because it was ceremonial. Because deals need momentum. Because you were overthinking the final clause like you always do. The clause about intellectual property transfer. Grant asked. The air tightened again. Vivian looked up. One of the attorneys slowly opened his folder. Preston's jaw shifted. Standard language. Grant's voice lowered. It was not standard. That is why I had questions. Maya stood very still, but the story widened before her. This had not only been about a drink. It had been about timing. Distraction. Trust forced too soon. A signature nudged across the table before the right eyes reached the wrong paragraph. Officer Hayes's radio crackled softly. He listened, then asked that the footage be sent to the monitor built into the side wall. Diane hesitated, then unlocked the screen with shaking fingers. The image appeared grainy but clear enough. Preston in the hallway before dinner. Preston alone. Preston removing a folded cocktail napkin from his inner jacket pocket and placing it carefully beneath his hand before entering the room. No one spoke. The footage did not explain everything, but it explained enough to destroy the laugh. Officer Hayes turned to Preston. Sir, we need to continue this conversation outside the dining room. Preston looked at Grant, waiting for protection that no longer existed. Grant did not move. He did not defend him. He did not soften the silence. For the first time all night, Preston Vale looked around the room and understood what Maya had understood from the beginning. Every room tells the truth eventually. Some just need one person brave enough to listen. Preston Vale did not leave with dignity. Men like him rarely do when the room stops bending around their version of events. He adjusted his jacket, gave a thin smile to no one in particular, and said, "This is a misunderstanding that my attorneys will resolve." But the sentence sounded smaller than he wanted it to sound. Officer Daniel Hayes stood by the open door with professional calm, not touching him, not threatening him, simply creating a path away from the table that Preston could no longer control. The powerful do not always lose loudly. Sometimes they lose when no one reaches for their defense. Grant Whitaker remained seated, one hand resting beside the closed contract folder, his eyes fixed on the monitor where the hallway footage had just disappeared into a blank blue screen. The room had changed shape around him. 10 minutes earlier, he had been the center of a $900 million evening. The man everyone watched for approval. The man whose toast would decide the mood, the timing, the future. Now the center of the room was a covered glass, a folded napkin, and a black waitress who had risked everything by paying attention. Preston paused at the door and looked back at Maya. Not with regret, with resentment. Maya met his gaze only once, then looked away. She refused to give his anger a place to land. That was another kind of strength, the kind no one applauds because it looks too quiet to understand. When the door closed behind him, the silence that followed was not peaceful. It was exposed. Diane Mercer stood near the side table, both hands clasped tightly in front of her black blazer. Vivian Cross lowered herself slowly back into her chair, not as the communications director protecting a billionaire, but as a woman realizing how close the room had come to rewarding the wrong confidence. One of Grant's attorneys cleared his throat. Mr. Whitaker, we should postpone the signing until every clause is reviewed again. Grant gave a slow nod. The signing is canceled. The words struck the table harder than any gavel. A few investors shifted in alarm. Canceled? One of them repeated. Grant looked at the sealed folder, then pushed it away. A deal that requires me to ignore a warning before I read the final pages is not a deal. It is a trap wearing a tailored suit. No one argued. Not because they all agreed, but because truth had become too visible to negotiate with. Maya finally set the tray down. Her fingers ached from holding it steady, but she had not noticed until the danger passed. Diane turned toward her, shame working its way through her expression. Maya, she began, then stopped. Apologies are easy when they are polished. Harder when they need to be honest. Maya waited. She had waited through disrespect before. She knew the difference between regret for being caught and regret for being wrong. Diane swallowed. I should not have tried to remove you from the room before listening. I am sorry. Maya nodded once. Thank you. She did not smile to rescue Diane from discomfort. She did not make the apology lighter. She accepted it as something overdue. Grant watched that exchange and felt his own guilt arrive, heavier than anger, cleaner than pride. He had demanded answers from Maya as if she had insulted him. He had seen her apron before he saw her courage. He had heard Preston call her just the waitress and had not corrected it fast enough. That failure stood beside him now, quiet and undeniable. Grant rose from his chair. The entire room followed him with its eyes, expecting a statement, a command, a controlled billionaire response. Instead, he walked around the table until he stood in front of Maya Brooks. For the first time that night, he was not looking down a hierarchy. He was looking at the person who had saved him from trusting the wrong man. "Miss Brooks," he said, voice low and clear, "I owe you my life, and before that, I owe you respect." Maya held his gaze. "I did what anyone should have done." Grant shook his head. "No, you did what everyone should have done, but you were the only one who did it." The room went still again, but this silence was different. This one did not belong to fear. It belonged to recognition. Recognition did not arrive like applause. It arrived in the way people stopped looking past Maya Brooks. The investors at the far end of the table sat straighter now, their confidence loosened, their faces carrying the uncomfortable weight of people who had watched courage enter the room, wearing an apron, and had almost mistaken it for disruption. Vivian Cross closed her notebook without writing another line. Diane Mercer stood beside the service cart with her eyes lowered, not because Maya had humiliated her, but because Maya had remained composed when the room gave her every reason not to. Grant Whitaker stayed in front of Maya for a moment longer, searching for words large enough to fit what had happened, then realizing large words were part of the problem. Rich men often reached for speeches when simple truth would do. "I am sorry," he said. Maya did not answer immediately. She looked at him with the calm patience of someone who had heard apologies used as a broom, sweeping discomfort out of sight without cleaning anything. Grant seemed to understand. He turned slightly, making sure the entire room heard him. "I am sorry for demanding your explanation as if your warning was an insult. I am sorry for letting anyone at this table reduce you to your job title. And I am sorry that you had to risk your position before any of us risked our pride." The words were not dramatic, but they were public. That mattered. Maya felt the room shift again, this time toward her instead of away. She thought of her mother in their South Side apartment, thought of the community college textbooks waiting under her bed, thought of all the times she had been told, directly or indirectly, that her instincts were less valuable because they came from behind a service tray. She had not stepped into that moment to become a symbol. She had stepped in because she saw danger and could not look away. But sometimes a person becomes a symbol when the truth they carry is larger than the room trying to contain it. "Thank you," Maya said finally. Her voice stayed steady. "But I did not do it for an apology." Grant nodded. "I know. And I did not do it because you are a billionaire." A few people looked up at that. Maya continued, softer now, but every word reached the walls. "I did it because you are a person. That should have been enough for everyone." The sentence settled over the table like a verdict without cruelty. Grant looked down. For years, he had believed loyalty lived in contracts, board seats, background checks, and people who smiled beside him in private rooms. Yet the man with the polished handshake had pushed him toward a risk, and the woman everyone had overlooked had stood between him and harm without asking what his life was worth. That was the reversal. Not loud, not theatrical, human. Officer Hayes returned to the doorway and spoke quietly with Diane, confirming that the glass and napkin would be secured, the footage preserved, and the matter handled through proper channels. Maya listened without expression, relieved but not triumphant. There was nothing joyful about being right when being right meant someone else had been willing to betray trust. Grant turned back to the table and closed the contract folder with one hand. "This dinner is over," he said. "Everyone may leave." No one protested. Chairs moved softly. Napkins were folded. Powerful people gathered their papers with the careful embarrassment of those who had witnessed a moral lesson and could not invoice anyone for it. As they filed out, a junior attorney paused near Maya. "You were very brave," she whispered. Maya gave a small nod. "I was paying attention." When the room finally emptied, only Grant, Maya, Diane, Vivian, and the quiet remains of the unfinished dinner were left beneath the amber chandeliers. Grant looked around at the crystal glasses, the untouched plates, the canceled future sitting inside a leather folder, and understood something that would stay with him long after the evening ended. He had walked into the Meridian Club prepared to buy certainty. Maya Brooks had given him truth instead. After the last investor left, the Meridian Club felt less like a restaurant and more like a stage after the lights had exposed too much. The candles still burned. The skyline still glittered beyond the glass. The bourbon still sat untouched beneath the white napkin, guarded now by procedure, not suspicion. But the room no longer belonged to contracts or status. It belonged to the quiet truth Maya Brooks had pulled into the open with 2 steady hands and one impossible choice. Vivian Cross stood near the side wall, speaking in a low voice with Officer Daniel Hayes while he documented the glass, the napkin, and the camera footage. She was no longer trying to protect the image of the evening. She was trying to preserve the facts. Diane Mercer asked 2 servers to clear the untouched plates, then stopped them before they reached Maya's tray, as if she finally understood that some objects in a room carry more meaning than crystal or silver. Grant Whitaker remained beside the long table, his hand resting on the closed contract folder. He did not look like the man who had entered at 6:57. His suit was still flawless, his cuff links still bright, his posture still controlled, but something behind his eyes had changed. He had spent his life studying risk, yet the greatest risk that night had been recognized by someone he had not even bothered to greet by name. Maya reached for a water glass at the edge of the table, more from habit than need, and Grant noticed the gesture. Even now, after saving him from a dangerous mistake, she was still cleaning the room. That realization struck him harder than Preston's betrayal. "Please do not do that," he said gently. Maya paused. "Do what, sir?" Grant looked at the table, then at her apron, then at the tray she had carried like a shield. "Return to being invisible just because the danger passed." Maya's face softened for a second, then steadied again. "I still have a job to finish." "No," Diane said quietly from behind her. Maya turned, surprised. Diane swallowed. "Not tonight. Tonight, you are not finishing the room alone." It was a small sentence, but small sentences sometimes repair what speeches cannot. Grant looked toward Vivian. "Make sure Miss Brooks is not mentioned publicly without her consent." Vivian nodded. "Of course. And make sure no one at my company refers to this as a service incident." His voice sharpened, not loud, but final. It was a human one. Maya listened, unsure what to do with protection when it arrived without being requested. For years, she had learned to measure safety in inches, the distance between herself and a rude guest, the space between a complaint and a manager's decision, the thin line between being helpful and being blamed. Tonight, that line had nearly cost her everything. Grant stepped closer, stopping at a respectful distance. "Why did you do it?" he asked. Not like an interrogation this time. Like a man asking to understand the person who had seen what he did not. Maya looked at the city outside, all those towers filled with people who believed power made them safer. "Because my mother taught me that silence is useful only if you use it to notice the truth," she said. "And because if I had been wrong, I would have lost my job. But if I had been right and did nothing, I would have lost myself." Grant lowered his eyes. That was the sentence that stayed with him. Not the security report. Not the canceled deal. Not Preston being escorted into a private office to answer questions. That sentence. If I had been right and did nothing, I would have lost myself. He thought of every boardroom where people stayed quiet because the wrong voice was powerful. Every contract signed because no one wanted to interrupt momentum. Every assistant, analyst, server, driver, and receptionist who had noticed something before the people in charge did, then swallowed the truth because the room had taught them their voice was too expensive. Grant looked back at Maya. "I trusted the man sitting beside me because he wore the right suit," he said. "And I questioned you because you wore an apron." Maya did not rescue him from the shame of that. She only stood there with quiet dignity, letting the truth do its work. Outside the private room, the city kept moving, indifferent and bright. Inside, a billionaire finally understood that being saved did not always feel heroic. Sometimes it felt like embarrassment. Sometimes it felt like gratitude arriving late. Sometimes it looked like a black waitress standing under amber chandeliers, reminding a room full of powerful people that courage does not need permission before it acts. Morning arrived in Chicago without asking whether anyone inside the Meridian Club had slept. By 8:15, the private dining room looked almost ordinary again. The candles were gone. The linens had been replaced. The skyline beyond the windows had traded its glitter for pale winter light, and the long table where a $900 million deal had collapsed now held only fresh flowers, polished silverware, and the quiet smell of lemon cleaner. Maya Brooks came in through the service entrance with her black coat folded over one arm, her hair pinned back, her apron tucked neatly into her work bag. She expected whispers. She expected Diane Mercer to call her into the office. She expected paperwork, questions, maybe even a warning disguised as procedure. That was how these places worked. Even when you were right, they found a way to remind you that being right had made someone uncomfortable. But Diane was waiting near the host's stand with 2 cups of coffee and eyes that looked as if she had practiced honesty in the mirror before Maya arrived. "You are not on the floor this morning," Diane said. Maya stopped. "Am I suspended?" Diane shook her head quickly. "No, you are being thanked properly." Before Maya could answer, the elevator opened. Grant Whitaker stepped out alone. No attorneys, no investors, no Vivian Cross, no polished crowd orbiting him like proof of importance. He wore a dark overcoat over a simple gray sweater, and for the first time, he looked less like a headline and more like a man who had spent the night meeting himself. In his hand was a plain folder, not leather, not embossed, not dramatic. Just paper, just intention. Maya stood still as he approached. The room seemed to hold its breath again, but differently now. "Miss Brooks," Grant said, stopping a respectful distance away. "I came early because I did not want an audience." Maya looked at the folder. "What is that?" Grant glanced down at it, then back at her. "First, a written apology. Not for public relations. Not for legal protection. For you. What I said, what I assumed, what I allowed in that room. All of it deserved more than a sentence at the end of a bad evening." Maya did not reach for it yet. Her face was calm, but her eyes carried the caution of someone who knew that powerful gratitude could become another kind of control if it was not handled carefully. Grant seemed to understand that too. "Second," he said, "there is information about an education fund my company supports. Independent administration. No contract with me. No cameras. No announcement. If you still want to return to healthcare studies, the tuition, books, transportation, and lost work hours can be covered. If you do not want it, nothing changes. Your choice remains yours." The words touched the part of Maya she rarely let the world see. The part that still remembered the nursing shoes under her bed. The part that still woke up some mornings feeling like her future had been placed on pause so long the world forgot it had ever been playing. Diane looked away, giving her privacy inside a public room. Maya finally took the folder, holding it with both hands. "Why?" she asked, though she already knew the easy answers and did not want any of them. Grant breathed in slowly. "Because last night you protected a person who had not earned your kindness. Because you saw the truth when everyone else saw status. And because a room that benefits from your attention should not ignore your future." Maya lowered her eyes to the folder, then lifted them again. "I did not save a billionaire," she said softly. "I protected a person." Grant nodded. "That is exactly why I am here." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, Chicago moved on, trains rumbling, horns calling, coffee shops filling with people who would never know what had happened above the city the night before. But inside that quiet dining room, something had been repaired without becoming simple. Preston Vale would answer questions. The canceled deal would become a cautionary story whispered through boardrooms. Diane would train her staff differently. Grant would listen harder before trusting the loudest voice in a room. And Maya, if she chose, would open the storage bin under her bed, lift out the cracked textbook, and remember that a dream delayed was not always a dream denied. She placed the folder against her chest, not like a gift, but like a door. Grant turned to leave, then paused beside the elevator. "Miss Brooks," he said, "thank you for not staying silent." Maya stood beneath the morning light, her black apron folded neatly in her bag, her dignity no longer hidden by it. "Thank you," she replied, "for finally understanding why silence should never be mistaken for weakness." The elevator doors closed. The restaurant remained still. And for once, the most valuable thing left in the Meridian Club was not the contract that failed, but the courage that refused to look away.